Hello, everybody. Happy Saturday to you all. I know as of late, I would normally come to you uh, throughout the week, but there's a topic on my mind that really has me motivated to come share. And as you see, it says, don't have an identity foreclosure, meaning when the playing stops. I know this is hoop season, March Madness on every level, playoff season right around the corner in the NBA. And I think it's very important that we start talking to our athletes about your identity and what's important right now. I had a very interesting article after I had a hypothetical I was looking at, and there was a British researcher who introduced the term identity foreclosure. I guess you can also call this term identity crisis. But what I'm getting at is that athletes have been working out since the summer, particularly in basketball, with all these goals. Here in Michigan, the goal is, the road to the Breslin. Want to get to the Breslin Center at Michigan State and play in the state championship. Right now, there are championship games going on right now, and winning, losing. And what normally happens, unfortunately, some of these games are ending with a buzzer beater. Some of these games are upsets. So many of our seniors are just players who have been working out all season long. All of a sudden, everything changes. And the question is, don't have this identity foreclosure. Talk a little bit about more. Chris Bosh, who we all know played with the Miami Heat, won those championships with the Miami Heat, and had an unexpected end to his career based on some health conditions. And there was a really interesting write-up by Dan Feldman with NBC Sports. A little lengthy, but I'll share this with you. I think it's worth sharing if you're an athlete, but more importantly, if you're a parent or a stakeholder in an athlete's life. He said it's pretty much like cruising along, going 150 miles an hour in your Porsche, and then you fall into a hole. This is what Chris Bosh says about his career ending unexpectedly. You go from being with the guys all the time, in the locker room, in practice, having a militarized brain in terms of the schedule, and then all of a sudden, you're on your own. He says, you lose a sense of purpose, you lose a sense of yourself, and you lose confidence. You find yourself saying, I was the best at this, and now I'm not the best. I have to deal with it not being very good. You have to deal with people no longer catering to you. You start feeling forgotten. You don't get as many phone calls. You don't stay at the forefront of people's minds. It's natural. It's life. You have to understand what's happening, but I definitely see why divorce rate is so high and why players grow broke, referring to an NBA athlete. A little bit more from Chris Bosh. He says, guys spend all their money trying to capture that feeling again. You can't eat at Prime 112, and for those of you who need to know, Prime 112 is a very expensive restaurant in South Beach, and you can only imagine what that's like. You can't eat there every night, he said. There's this never-ending search that the feeling that you once had, and it can cost you. He said, unlike many NBA players, Bosh seemed like an intellectual with many interests outside of basketball. This is Feldman, the writer, talking about Bosh. He said, it appeared he could transition out of playing better than most, but it's hard, especially because he didn't leave the game on his own terms. Hopefully, Bosh eventually finds peace, and he's clearly not there yet. Now, in my book, Unlikely Saviors, I wrote several years ago, there was an article, portion of it, where I talked about when the cheering stops. And I was able to interview one of the contacts with the University of Missouri football program. And a quote I got from one of the players was, it is hard to fathom that I am no longer a Missouri football player, and the tag and that identity is no longer there. Whether you're high school, whether you're college, for so long, all you think about is how far I can go in my career. For so long, we think about what I need to do to get to the ultimate, and you never want to second guess that thought. You never want to challenge that thought. But the reality is that now that this season is ending for some people, expectedly or unexpectedly, it's time to try to refer and say, what do I want to do next? Who am I? You have to call yourself, you can't really refer to yourself as a basketball player or as a football player, but you can be Lindsay that plays football. You can be put in your name that plays basketball. I think it's important to think about that. And as parents and as supporters and as nurturers, we really need to kind of develop that. I know for many people it's NBA or bust, NFL or bust, but the reality is there's nothing wrong with thinking about what other things you could do along the way. My friend Ira Childers, athletic director at Okemos High School, is putting together a great event next April, and I'm going to post that in a second. And what he talks about is careers in sport. Now, you can continue your career in sport. You know, I'm far beyond being a high school athlete, but now I'm able to kind of be engulfed in sport on a daily basis based on the career choice that I have. And there's nothing wrong with thinking about that. Now, I want to take this a step further. This is especially for my parents and the other stakeholders with these young people. We also have to realize that there's a possibility that the transition from sport can lead to some potential, and I hate to say it, but it's true, mental challenges and even some mental illness opportunities, And research has shown that when you go from being very committed, and then there's this huge identity shift, you really need to keep that in mind. Who do we see talking about that recently in the news? DeMar DeRozan with the East Conference leading Toronto Raptors. He came out and talked about depression and the issues he was having. Also, Kevin Love talked about that as well. There's an interesting article that's out about that, and I'll be sure to post that as well. And Royce White, about 4 or 5 years ago, people really gave him grief because he was an Iowa State player, got drafted by the Houston Rockets, but he refused to travel by plane because of his extreme anxiety issues, right? And people kind of lambasted him. They got on, oh, man, you're making all this money, just go. And he even just recently made a comment. He said, you know, at first people didn't want to follow me and believe in me and support me, but now the other people, and I think he's referring to DeMar DeRozan and Kevin Love, have come out, everyone's standing by them. We have to understand that mental health issues are real. Now, I'm first want to tell you, my focus is on performance. My focus is on increasing athletes and individuals' performance, whether they're an athlete or an entertainer. But when you get into the world of mental health, when you start dealing with depression and anxiety, you need to get with someone who is certified in that. And I don't have any problem saying I'm not there yet. My goal is to help you with your performance and go further and even direct you to those kind of resources. But whether it's the African-American community, whether it's a minority community, or just people in general, we have to become more familiar and more comfortable with reaching out to individuals to get a census with our mental health. So let me go back again and recap what I was talking about. We do not want you to have an identity foreclosure, meaning we don't want you to have an identity crisis when the cheering stops. As Chris Bosh stated in the article that I read, you know, you're so used to being a man. Even in my book, Unlikely Saviors, when I interviewed my good friend, TJ Duckett, he talked about, you know, making, you know, millions of dollars and not making that anymore, not being able to go out to eat every night, and those type of things, and what kind of challenge that has on your psyche. So again, to wrap this up, what I want to say, especially coming off these championship wins and losses, it's very important that we get with our young athletes and say, okay, whether you're coming back for a sophomore, junior, or senior year in high school, college, or whatever it may be, what are your plans for the future outside of this sport? What are your plans for the future outside of playing this sport? Whether it's getting into coaching, sports psychology consulting, or sports psychology, I'm totally about promoting that field. Whether it's getting into becoming an agent. But I think this is the time, despite the heartbreak you may have of a last-second shot that ended your career when you didn't expect it, or as you saw this come along, this is the time to say, okay, who am I? Because I play basketball, but my identity is not just a basketball player. I love and I play football or whatever sport we want to insert, but my identity is not just that. I think that's a very important thing we need to look at. And I also made mention earlier to the concern of how a lot of these unchecked issues have the potential to develop into mental health issues. That's really important that we address. And again, DeMar DeRozan came out recently, talked about his battles with depression. Kevin Love talked about having an actual anxiety attack during the game. And Royce White, who many of you may not know about, but was a first-round draft pick, but almost kind of forego that because he didn't want to travel by plane, and people gave him issues with that. So as I wrap up, approaching the 10-minute mark, I want to thank everyone for continuing to support. Again, there's going to be some huge announcements going forward with the SPS Edge Summer and Mental Toughness and Social Media Etiquette presentations that will be taking place throughout the state, but you'll see some more advertising about that. But I really want to get out there right now and talk to you guys about, as these games are wrapping up, whether it's high school, whether you have some loved ones in college and they're going through the heartbreak of March Madness, let's really pull our young people in and embrace them and say, now let's think about what the future is outside of you playing the sport. Not being involved in the sport, but just your future outside of playing the sport, and work to develop that. And the last thing I'll say is that we really have a huge impact as far as what we say, because we'll say, I thought you was all about the NBA. And then that focus becomes, I got to just focus on being a professional athlete and that's it. But as we all know, for everyone, that doesn't happen. And even for those that it happens for, In the book, Jimmy King, we talked about something great years ago. He said, Jimmy King of the Fab Five, he said, your second career is more important than your first career. Your second career is more important than your first. So even if we say go and you can be a professional athlete, if you don't have a plan set up once the cheering stops, once the game is over, what is your second career going to be? Think about it. Professional athletes, unless you're playing table tennis, and I could be wrong with that, but their lifespan is about 3 to 5 years in that particular profession, so to speak. If you're ending your professional career at approximately 25, 30 years old, with a healthy life, you're going to live to be 80 plus, God willing. So what's that extra or that new thing you're stepping into? And I think right now is the time to address it, right when these championship games are wrapping up, or you say, hey, this is the time to start thinking about the future. Ira Childress, if you're going to be in the Lansing area, I want to say April 18th, and I'll post just to be sure. You can come to the Career Night in Sports. I'll be there presenting about sports psychology consulting and the opportunities that happen there and how you have to have an entrepreneurial mindset to be successful in that. There are going to be other individuals there to present, but I think that's a great way to start opening our young people up to what their future is going to be like, because you can't keep dribbling the ball forever. You can't keep throwing the ball forever. You can't keep running track forever, whatever it may be. And we want to make sure that your time outside of sport is just as fulfilling as your time during sport. So with that, I want to thank you guys. Have a great weekend. And I hope your team wins. And that doesn't mean that they got the biggest points at the end of the game, but that they have a great future, and that's based on the support you give them. Lindsay Huddleston with Sports Psychology Solutions. See you guys soon. Thank you.